Okay, we are recording. And so I'm Jack Porter, my wife Loretta with me here. And it is July 30th, 2024, and I'm sitting here with Peggy Arness to get the story of her family. So, we'll get started. Peggy, you were originally from where?
I was born in Seldovia
In Soldovia. Yeah, okay.
in 1925.
Well, yeah.
And we lived there until I was 9 years old. And then we went out to Unga out on Aleutians. My dad got a job as U.S. Marshal. And so that's what we did. We moved out there. And we were there all through the war. And then in, I think it was 51. No, I got that wrong. Anyway, he got transferred. They closed the marshal's office at 45. That was it. 45, I think 45 or 46. And they closed the marshal's office there and sent him to Kenai. He was, and my folks were delighted. Mother was delighted about that because her sister lived in Casilla, McLean's, you know. They homesteaded there. So mother would be closer to her, and so that was good. And this is the end of it. We're still here. Well, I was out at Unga with them, and during a school, there was a school there, but mother and her sister Enid had decided that we kids should go to outside to high school. And they didn't have high school in Casilla, and she had 3 children, and there was 2 of us. And my grandparents lived out in Bellevue, and they had a big house, and so the women decided that that's where we should go. So we were supposed to go down there, 5 of us kids, to stay with Grandma and Grandpa for high school years. And I absolutely refused to go for my first year. I didn't want to leave Unga. So I didn't. I stayed in Unga for my first year of high school. And then I went out for 2 years. And then I wanted to graduate in Alaska, so I came back to Unga and graduated. Then the war came along.
Yeah.
World War II, and we were right in the middle of it. Everybody either left Unga, or the ones that stayed were like Daddy was really active in war action and so forth, and Mother wanted to stay and teach school to however she could, no other teachers there. There was three teachers in the school, but the others left to go to get out of the way. So when I went back, let's see, I'd gone to 1 year of college outside. I'd gone back for my 2nd year, and I got a phone call from the Commissioner of Education in Juneau asking me if I would be interested in going back to Unga to be a teacher with my mother, because he couldn't find anybody that would go back there because of the status of the war.
Okay, can I interrupt you just a second, just so that people understand? Unga is an island on the Aleutian chain.
Yeah.
And during World War II, actually the Aleutian chain, outside of the bombing of Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, the Aleutian chain was the only place in the United States where there was any combat. It was called the Aleutian Campaign. Mm-hmm. So she's talking about being out there during World War II when the fighting was going on the Aleutian chain. Okay, I just wanted to get that in because not everybody maybe remembers that.
A lot of people don't, yeah. And if they had heard it, they'd forgotten to realize what it was. But it was, there was a lot of action out there. And we we had nothing to offer anybody in the village of Unga, but a lot of and out there, as far as like the big freighters or the people, the troop ships that came in with the troops, there was no place that they could dock anywhere on the islands. You know, there were little docks, but nothing that could take care of them. So the Army had a lot of work boats, power barges, and that kind of boats to leader things back and forth between the boat, the troops and the supplies and so forth. And at that time, that's where I met Jim. He was a skipper on one of these boats. He was on many boats out there. He was out there for 5 years. And yeah, he brought in a bunch of supplies to Unga. And that's where I met him. And the first time he came, he spent all of his time talking to my dad. I don't know why he did that, except that he didn't dance, and the entertainment for when these small boats would come in was we had a round dance hall. It was a tank up in the Unga area. There was a gold mine, and it had closed down, and they had this big tank that they had. So before we got there, somebody had knocked that down and brought it down to the village and put it up. So we had this beautiful, round, perfectly round dance floor.
Oh yeah.
It was this, I should get the pictures out and show you.
Yeah.
I danced thousands of miles of shalishes and polkas over that dance floor. If anybody wanted to have a dance, they would first go to, there was somebody in the village was assigned to be in charge of the dance hall. And they'd pay $5, and then someone would go down and hang a lantern up in the top of the dance floor. And from my bedroom, I could look out and see the dance hall.
Yeah.
And if there was a light on in the dance hall, I was gone. I wanted to dance. So I taught school all morning that year.
Dance all night.
Danced all night. Yeah. That was during the war, and it was an unreal time, you know, it happened. I was in this spot with,
Oh yeah.
yeah. But it was fun. There was a good experience for teaching. Mother was, she was in the school with me, and you know, made sure that helped me along. And I had the first 4 grades, and one of the students was Jackie Pells, who I don't know whether you've seen her or not. She's written 2 or 3 books about things Alaska. We have stayed in touch, and every time she comes to Alaska, she comes in here, and she likes to introduce me as her teacher, you know, and she's, how old is she? Jackie's in her 80s.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and Peggy just turned 99.
Yeah, just 99. Got 1 more to go. And then I've told my oldest great-grandson, he's entering his senior year at Colorado School of Mines this year. And I told him last year when he was up that I would like to go to his graduation, and I'll be 100 years old.
Oh yeah.
And so this is a big deal now. I tell everybody, slow down, because it's a long time till next spring. A lot can happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So where was Jim from?
He was Seattle. He was born in, I gotta look that up. He was born, his folks both came from Norway, but they didn't meet until they were here in the United States. and they happened to be, had gotten each house homestead in Minnesota. And that's how they met. They were neighbors,
Wow.
you know, his mother and his dad. Yeah, and but the dad didn't like homesteading. He had graduated from law school, and he was just like Jim. He was always looking for something different to do, you know, and moving around fast. And so they ended up in the Seattle area. And that's where Jim was born. And so there were 10 children in the family.
So then, somehow he must have gotten the service to.
So he was in his senior year of high school, and that was right at the beginning of, you know, when the World War II was real active, you know, and it got so that every boy that was near the age of that they wanted to go because they didn't even like to go downtown without a uniform on, you know.
Wow.
It was. So what he did is he was in his senior year, and there were several of the boys in the class, and they decided to quit school and join up. So they did, and they were hoping to get some southern place, you know, a warm place to go.
That didn't quite work, did it?
And then first thing he knew, he was up in Seward, and he spent the first winter in a tent in Seward in the Army. And he was always a lover of boats, and you know, in Seattle they lived on the waterfront, and so one of his jobs was to take supplies out to out of Seward in the harbor there. They had lookouts for watching for Japanese submarines, you know, coming in, because that's pretty close to, you know, the war was going on out in the chain then. And he got to running that, and then pretty soon they put him on a boat, and the next thing he knew, he was on his way out to the chain, and he was out there for 5 years.
Yeah.
And he found me out there.
From basically right out of high school to being a skipper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He didn't even he was in his senior year of high school, and he quit school to join the Army, and he could have he was on several different ships for the Army, but always out there, you know. They went from Dutch Harbor out to Adak and that too, and he knew, and it was, you know, there wasn't anything but a compass and you know, maps.
Even when I was young, I remember that everything was done by compass. There was no GPS and all that.
I still got a bunch of his maps. He loved to look at them, and in our travels, he loved to go on the ferry, and we went out several times after we were living here, out to Chain on the ferry, you know, and he'd say, 20 minutes, and you better go back and get on the bunk, because I got seasick, you know. And he knew the shoreline from Seattle out to Dutch Harbor and out that way.
Not enough to know it.
He knew it, and it you know, well, that's the way he had to know it, because he you know, that's all they had, and were just the maps, and he memorized them, and he never forgot it. And then he'd come and get me after, you know, if there was going past a place where there was a bluff or whatever. So he loved to do all that.
Well, a little while ago, you said that when you moved to Kenai, it sounded like you were still with your mother. You hadn't married Jim yet.
I didn't marry Jim out there. I went back out to college. I spent the winter in the teaching and stayed there this summer, and then I wanted to go back and get my degree. And Jim was, I would see him occasionally. You know, the boats used Unga as kind of a good place to stop and have a dance, and you know, and there
Yeah.
wasn't anything there but just a small village. But we were, and Mother and Daddy, Mother would have dinner for people, the soldiers, you know, that would come in there. And anyway, it was a rare winter. But I went back out to school, but I kept in touch with Jim by mail, you know. Never saw him again until he was going to be discharged. He got back to Seattle, and then they sent him to California, and then they sent him to Florida to teach. He called him, I've forgotten what the word was. But the Navy and Army would recruit these young guys that didn't even live on the water coast anyplace, didn't know anything about a boat, you know, and then they'd stick a bunch of them on one of those boats and have, like Jim, teach them, you know. He didn't like that very well. But then when he got discharged finally, and he came back to Seattle, and we were married in Seattle.
So you met him in Seattle?
Then I married her there. And then he was flat broke, you know, he just been in the Army forever, and you know, what are we gonna do? You know, you get married first and then you think about it.
That's right.
You know? So, you know, my grandparents still lived in Bellevue and Kirkland across Lake Washington. And Grandpa died, and Grandma was with her sister when we got married. And she says, why don't you go to my house in Kirkland? And she wasn't in there, she was staying with her sister right after Grandpa died. So we went over there and we stayed there. And Stan McLean he came back from the Marines, and he was in tough shape. And he was wanting to come home to Casilla. And so he came and stayed at our house while he was waiting for the Baronoff to get, and he had another attack of malaria. So he wasn't feeling very good. And anyway, Jim every day would get up and he'd go out looking for a job. And he came back this one day, Stan was at our house, and he'd gotten a job with the Corps of Engineers. And I said, well, what kind of a job is it? Well, it's a contract to go back out to the Aleutians for 3 years and take care of all the boats that the Army had gotten, all the work boats, you know, were still tied up out there. And they had to be brought back and sold. So Jim signed that contract without even telling me, you know. And I said, what the hell am I supposed to do? Oh, well. He says, I was out there for 5 years. I can do 3 years in a minute. Okay, go. So he did. And as soon as he left, Stan was still at the house. He was really in tough shape, but he was still waiting for the Baronoff. And I decided Stan needed somebody to take care of him while he's on that trip up there. And I knew my aunt and uncle, McLean's, you know, couldn't wire them, couldn't talk to them, you know, no communication.
Right.
So I got a room on the Baronoff too, and came up with Stan, and came to Casilla. Jim didn't know about it. He was gone back out to the, and my folks were still out of Dunga. Out of Dunga. And Stan got in, when he got home, you know, Enid really took care of him, and pretty soon he was feeling pretty good. But I was there about 3 months, and I got a wire from Jim, or I guess it was Muckluck Telegraph, I think is what it came with. He was coming, he was bringing some boats into Seward that the Army had sold, and they wanted them back into Seward to And so I was to meet him in Seward. I did. And Heine Berger was the guy that had bought these boats, you know, Heine Berger.
Oh, yeah. Heine's got quite a reputation
Yeah,
too
he
from the
does.
old days.
He won the ice bowl twice.
Oh,
And so I went over to Seward, and I knew Heine Berger from Kasilov, and introduced him to Jim, and Heine thought, boy, Jim would be a good one to run these boats. He wanted to get these boats ready to come up here to Cook Inlet, because that was before there was a road anywhere, you know.
right.
So you didn't go anyplace unless you went by boat or
By boat, yeah.
boat or airplane. So Heine had bought 2 of those boats, and he wanted them brought down to Seattle to get them worked over so they were ready for the next spring, you know. And he wanted Jim had one of them, and then the other one followed Jim, and that's so I tagged along and went on that. So, but you know, we were married three months before he went out to, and this was like 5 months later. So Jim was happy with that, and he was the idea of coming up here and riding the boat in Inlet. He thought that'd be a good deal. And by that time, my dad had been transferred to Kenai as marshal.
Oh, yeah.
And so they were coming, so everybody was, my family was coming right here to Kenai, and so that's how we got here.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And,
Yeah, so from there, when did you finally come to start the homestead?
well, when we got here to Kenai, and that was the end of it for me. I was going to stay here, you know. Jim wanted to, and the military, you know, had the homesteads that the military people that were discharged and wanted a homestead. They could pick their land and you know, sit there for 5 months. I think it was 7 months, something like that, and then they get power, you know. So there was a whole bunch of them that came around here, and Jim put in for quite a few around Kenai, and he didn't. And it was drawings, and he didn't get it. So one day he says, "I'm going to go up. I'm going to get in my dory and go up the inlet a little ways and see what I can find." So he came into about where Sakalov's, you know.
Yeah.
He got off there, plugged his dory in there, and walked into this place from there. Just walked in, and he came back home, and he says, "I found it," you know. But it wasn't surveyed, and so he had to go to Anchorage to get it surveyed and apply for it.
Oh, yeah.
And he got it, and so then we had to get set. So then we came out and built a house up at where Arness Road starts, you know. That's
Yeah.
put in our time there and got the property, and then we had to build this road down here, and this is the first house we built here. Burned up while we were down at the dock. We lost everything. But we had a trailer down at the dock that we were living in, and so when we sold the dock, we brought the trailer up here and put it right on this spot. This is where it had to be, and so put the trailer here. And I thought that was it. We were going to live in this trailer the rest of life, which was fine with me. And the boys were both out of school and, you know, moving around. I know they said, "No, you can't do that. You got to have a house." They kept after it with their dad until finally he says, "Okay, it's gotta be right here though. Okay. So they moved that trailer that we were, and Marvine bought the trailer. Moved it into town, and the kids, the boys helped, and they built this house, but they didn't have this. It was just from that wall back.
Oh, yeah.
Because Jim says we're not having any. You know, he did this stuff. This is the way he was. He'd make up his mind and he'd say, "This is what it's going to be. There's not going to be any closets in the place because you don't want to store anything. And there's going to be a kitchen, and there's going to be a living room, and there's going to be my chair here, and the TV's going to here, and we have wood stove, and then over here is going to be a bed, and a bathroom, and that's all." And I says, "I got a lot of stuff. I don't know where you're going to put it." And Jimmy was really worried, my son Jim. They were, both the boys were grown, you know, and they knew their dad, so, and Jimmy says, "Mother, you can't survive if you don't have your stuff." So I had projects I was doing, you know, I was macrameing, and I was doing this, and I had a job in town, and, you know, I was working. So I said to Jimmy, "Why don't you put it upstairs on the back part of this house and stick a stairway up there?" And when Jim found out that Jimmy was thinking about this, you know, Jim finally gave in and says, "Okay, but it's only on half the house. We're just having one room up there. Well, I'm never going up there," he said. Oh, God.
Now, you mentioned the dock, and to me, that's a big deal. Is that
Oh,
dock.
yeah, that was a big
And at that time, I was still in school at that time, but I didn't realize at that time the significance of what you were actually doing there.
Yeah.
But there wasn't a whole lot of places to go to work around here.
Yeah.
There wasn't a lot of jobs to be had. And you guys built that dock and put a lot of people to work around here. Gave a lot of people a job. And the way you built the dock, very unique. I know you went out and you got some Liberty ships.
Yeah.
And you've got 2 of them, is that right?
3.
Three Liberty ships. And you brought them in and beached them and made the dock out of those Liberty ships. Now those Liberty ships, I looked on the internet a little while ago, and those Liberty ships were 441 feet long and 57 feet wide. So 3 of them together gave you quite a surface there.
They were like this, and like this.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, Jim, he knew that this area needed a dock. You know, he was just, we were still, I think we were down here at the homestead at that time. He had that dock in his mind for a long time. And he went to the city people in Kenai and told them, you know, that this part of the inlet needed a dock. There wasn't anything in Anchorage, but there was a dock in Seward, and you know, they needed something over here so freight could go back and forth. And nobody would listen to him, you know. The city council, they didn't. He's just talking. So Jim would get in the pickup and he'd go out the road and he watched the tide, you know, in different places up there. And finally he says, "I know where it should go." And I said, "Well, what are you going to do about it?" Well, it was on, you know, that Nikiski Bay there. It spelled Nikiska, you know, but the nickname was Nikiski. And he says, "There's never any ice in there in the winter. That's an ice-free bay." And he watched it, and you know, and he could see, and down where Rig Tenders is, there's ice there, you know. Every other place had ice, but this one didn't. So that's why he thought that would be a good place for a dock. But there was no talk of oil at the time. They were beginning to come around, but nobody had been around, you know, the waterfront there
Right.
at that time. And so anyway, he went back to Anchorage and leased that property there, you know. And then he got a couple of the McGann kids and, you know, a couple others, and he had a cat, we called it Castro, a little rinky-dink cat. And they went down and they shoveled out and they got a bulkhead. They cut some trees and they got a bulkhead across the front and on both sides. And he had, well, I think there were Dahlchucks and Toloffs and McGann's, you know, some of the young guys were around at that time. And that was his crew. And what we had to do, we had gotten our title on our homestead by then, and we didn't have any money, you know.
Yeah.
We'd fish in the summertime, and that's it. And, you know, we'd search for nickels and dimes to live the rest of the time. We kept ourselves out of debt, but we didn't, and we weren't going to borrow it from anybody until we knew for sure, you know, what we needed to do. So anyway, he decided on that was the spot, and so then they worked on that, and we had, I think we were down here, yeah, we had finally gotten down here from the road by that time, and no telephones. Finally, I got a telephone out here, in here, but there wasn't nothing there, no way to communicate with him at all, you know, like when he started working on the dock, he'd go in the morning and I wouldn't see him, and he'd get phone calls or whatever, or, you know, I didn't have any car or anything. We had a pickup and he had that, and, you know, we had the kids and that's about it. But finally, and then, I think it was before the Liberties, he came home one day and he says, guess what? He says, I was working down on the dock this morning on the gravel for the dock, and these two guys, he says, in what do you call them? Suits, anyway, suits and ties.
Oh yeah.
They came walking down the bluff, and they asked him, you know, who owns this? What's it? And he says, I do. And they said, well, we're interested in bringing some offshore drilling up here, and we need a place to work from. Are you interested? And Jim says, well, you gotta tell me what to do, and I'll do it, you know. And that's how it happened. And then it just exploded. It just exploded. I was still down here at here and couldn't go anywhere, couldn't get messages to him or anything, and so it wasn't long before he finally got the base of the dock where the gravel was, and he kind of got it so it was okay, and then he says, I'm gonna find us a trailer and we'll live in that. So he found this little one-room trailer, and we had the kids, you know, too. Oh God. And anyway, we camped down there right on the back end of this gravel part he had there. And, you know, by then everything was coming in. I mean, there was pipe and there was drilling mud and there was all this stuff and all these different people. And we finally got a telephone, so I had a telephone in the kitchen. And that's the only one, that's the only communication from the boats coming in or anybody trying to contact us at all.
Oh yeah.
It was just unbelievable. It was so wild. And it was 24 hours a day, and it went on for 10 years. Unbelievable. It just, you know, and I've always said, and I really mean it, if anybody told me that I could have 10 years of my life again, I'd say, I want that. It was just, every day was exciting. And I got so that at night the telephone would ring It could have been an oil man, it could have been a boat, whoever it was. They always wanted something from the dock, you know. So I'd answer them, I'd give them an answer, and try to help them. And then in the morning, when Jim woke up, he'd say, "What happened?" And I'd tell him. And I didn't realize it at the time but it was unbelievable. My mind, I could talk and you know, everything would go by and then it would stay in my mind and then I could repeat it. And I knew the telephone numbers and the names of all the people and the different things, the mud companies, the oil companies, the boats and all that. And Jim would, he'd say, "Hello, Smiley," and then he'd look at me, you know, if somebody come up and I'd have to tell, "That's Joe from whatever." You know.
Oh, yeah.
And then when we moved up here after it was all over with, that thing just walked out of my mind. I couldn't tell you anything.
Got it when you needed it.
No, but it was, but it got to be, you know, really apparent pretty quick that we needed to have a bigger dock and more facilities for these guys because, you know, the drilling companies were coming in with these you know, and ours was the only place that they could get ashore, you know, so everything was there. And so he made a trip out to Foss Company in Seattle, and he used to work for them when he was a kid, you know, and Henry Foss, the guy that owned the company, he took a liking to Jim, you know, and so when Jim came down there and had this wild idea that he needed something quick that he could make a bigger dock out of it. And Henry Foss says, "Let's go take a look at the Liberty ships." And so they went down and Henry Foss financed it for us, helped us with that, and we bought 3 of them and brought them up and anchored them there.
Yeah, I've never heard of another dock being built like that.
I don't think there ever was.
No.
I just worry about it now because I don't know who's, you know, there's nothing down there now. I don't know what's going to happen with it. It's, but it was an absolute unreal 10 years.
I remember that after the earthquake in '64, my dad was in the car business, and I remember that the road was out to Anchorage. Around Portage, it was gone. You didn't drive to Anchorage anymore, and he needed to bring cars in. He brought them in over your dock until they got the road open again.
We got all kinds of stuff came in. Jim would, you know, somebody say, "I want this. Can you handle it?" "I'll take it." You know, you just tell me what to do. Tell me when it's coming, and I'll take care of it. And, you know, there were days, I mean, it was 24 hours a day. And finally, the boys were in high school playing basketball, you know. And Jim really wanted to see them at the basketball games. So he wrote this letter. I'll have to show you the stuff I've got about. He wrote this letter and sent it to all the companies we were doing business with. The service companies and everybody, and they said that he worded it that the 2 of the board of directors are involved in basketball, and when they are playing here in Kenai, and when they are on away games that I can get to, I'm closing the dock for the time, and because they can only do this basketball for just a while and then it's over with. Nice letter. And they you know, Jim did it. He really wanted to, you know, watch the kids and the sports. So. Yeah, that was, we lived in an unbelievable, there was like 2 rooms in this little cabin, and then he put an addition on it so that we had a bedroom and a little bit of a living room. There was a kitchen, and the kitchen was the office for the whole thing too. I mean, everybody that came through, they came, because the telephone was, there was only one telephone that was right there in my kitchen, you know.
Oh, yeah.
That's the only way anybody getting communication to the boats or anything. We finally got a marine radio, so we could talk to them, you know,
Yeah.
talk to the boats and so forth. And finally, the phone system came out more. What I had first was radio anchorage, so everything that went through the phone that we had went through radio anchorage, and you could hear people talking on.
Okay, so that was before my folks brought the telephones out here.
Yeah. Well, they probably were part way out, but not as far as the dock and everything, you know, at that time. So, but every once in a while I'd complain to Jim, I would just like to take a bath without having somebody holler at me, wanting something or something. And well, you can't do it now, you know. And I said, yes, I can. I can go to town and rent a hotel room and stay.
There you go.
I threatened to do it. I didn't do it. But finally, he says to me, I'm not going off this dock. I can't even have something. At first I said, let's build something up on top of the hill. So we're off the dock a little ways. Nope, can't do that. I gotta be right here. So finally he says, you go to Anchorage and see if you can find a house trailer that's comfortable enough, and we'll put it right here by this little shack we had.
Oh yeah.
And we can live in that, and you can have a bath without being interrupted. And so I said, okay. So I went to Anchorage, and that was when double wide trailers were just coming in, and one of the dealers up there had one, the double wide, you know. That's a good one. That's big enough for the boys could each have their room, and we could have a room with 2 bathrooms in it, and a little kitchen, and you know. And I didn't even think about where it was going to go or anything like that. I knew it was going to go on the dock, but I didn't know it would take up half the dock. So I went back down and I told Jim about it. And just about that time, there was a heliport that was on one of the platforms, and they wanted to get it off of there. They were putting a new one in or something. And Jim says, can I have that? The guy said, yeah. So they brought this platform in, and or a heliport, you know, just like for helicopters to land on the platform.
Right.
And they put it down right in front of our house, the little shack that we were living in. And then we brought the double wide trailer down and put that on top of that. I have to show you the picture of it. And so then we took out one window in one of the boys' bedrooms, and then fixed the stairway up to the trailer up above there. So you had to go through there, and then the little shack we had down the side was that was the office.
And a little bit of a coincidence, if I've got the time, the years close to right, at the time you're talking about, her dad was in the trailer business in Anchorage. It'd be quite a coincidence if you happened to apply that to him.
I don't remember where I got it up there at the time, but yeah.
He had a place called Hensley Trailer Sales.
Yeah,
He sold travel trailers and mobile homes, both. So.
Well, this was one of the double wides, you know.
Yeah, he sold double wides. When we first got married, we lived in one of the double wides.
That's funny.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was we had to do some adjustments. Number one, I was getting a dog for Joe for Christmas, and I said, well, we got to have a dog that does not ever want to go outside because it's too far. So I got a poodle for him. That was our first poodle. That worked out pretty good. But, yeah. And then when we went to sell a place, when we were ready to leave there, you know, our house had burned that we had down here, and we'd lost everything. And so Jim says, well, we're gonna take this trailer and take it back, bring it up here to the homestead. And so he did. We had the crane down there, and then he brought the crane up here to lift the trailer off the truck, and on the same well and same cesspool and everything. It hooked up the house. The house burned. It was one of those windstorms that took everything.
Wow.
When Joe and I walked back here to see how the house fared after the windstorm, and we got here and there wasn't anything except the bathtub and the stove, kitchen stove was in there. Everything else had blown away.
Huh. Yeah.
So,
Well, now I run into Joe once in a while around here, but I haven't seen Jimmy in a long time. Is he still around?
Jimmy's in tough shape. He doesn't get out of the house. He can hardly walk. In fact, she just took him to the hospital this morning, but he's coming back. He can hardly walk, and he's not in very good shape.
Mm.
But Joe is doing fine.
He seemed to be, yeah, seemed to be very healthy.
He's doing pretty good. He's the one I call when I need anything.
Yeah.
I forgot what the thing was that our power went off yesterday, about 4 hours or so, up on the Miller Loop Road, and I have an answering or one of those security things, and the darn thing started bellowing at me after the power was off. So I finally called Joe to come down and see, and he tried to unhook it, and he couldn't get it. It turned out that the company that had the security thing had been sold to another one, and so, but anyway, it went on all last night, and it's unplugged now. He has to get fixed. Joe says, "Well, you're 99, I have to get help somewhere."
Yeah.
But anyway, let's see, where were we on the, I don't know what, after the dock, we had the dock for 10 years, and then some of the service companies or people that were involved with the oil, they started making noise about rig tender stock, and Jim said, he said to me, he says, if they don't like the service we're providing and they're gonna go make their own, we're gonna get out of here. I'm not gonna compete with oil companies. And that's fine with me, whatever goes, so that's what happened. And when they, rig tenders got in there, and Foss Company decided they still had boats coming in and out, and they decided that they wanted to run it, so we sold it to them and came back to here.
Wow.
And then Jim was happy, and there was always something, his mind is always going to do something. And there was snow machines were starting out, and so he got in with Dirk Kevorkian and Salvatnan, and on that store that they had the snow machines. And then he put one in down here, and then he got into racing snow machines and doing stuff like that. And there was always something, that he was involved with. Let's see, what came after the snow machine? Oh, all around about that time, he watched the oil companies, and then he also watched the growth of the whole peninsula, and the different towns and the schools that were built and so forth. And he saw that swimming pools were starting into the schools. And he watched, and there wasn't any school out here at all, you know, everybody had to go to Kenai. And they didn't seem to be interested in trying a school out here. And we didn't have any connection with any swimming pool like the towns had. They all had a pool. Seward had a pool, Seldovia had a pool, Homer had a pool, Kenai had a pool, Saldana had a pool. Everybody had a pool, but nobody out here had one. We didn't have any, you know. And so that was in the back of his mind, and he, after we got the dock sold, and he was working with the snow machines and so forth, and then he got to thinking about more and more about the pool. And so he decided to run for borough assembly, get himself involved politically that way. And then he got Wally Van Sky and Carl Seaman, two or three others, I've forgotten who they are now. And they got kind of a group together, and Jim proposed, he says, there's something wrong with this. Kenai had a power. They had their own power. What's his name? I forgot his name.
Raleigh. Raleigh.
Raleigh, yeah.
Yeah.
He had the power for the city of Kenai.
Right.
And so, but Homer Electric was starting. It was started at Homer, and it came up, and it went to that outside part of the city limits of Kenai. And then it stopped, and then it went on to sewers, you know. So in Jim's mind, he says, we'll never get power out here, you know. We're just an afterthought after Kenai. Kenai's got their own power, and we were stuck, you know, after.
Yeah.
And so he thought about that. And he decided that we needed to make our own entity of power, like Homer Electric was, you know, and call it Cook Inlet Electric or something like that. And he got some of the guys, to, you know, with him. And they made an application and sent it to Washington about getting the power out this way. A lot of the oil companies were already out here, you know.
Yeah.
So it gets to Washington D.C. and this is unbelievable. But in the group, in that rural electrical, they called it REA, I think, rural electrical, all of the you know groups like that in the United States had to answer to them. And on this board there, when this letter came from Kenai wanting to start one here, when Homer Electric was already started, one of the guys' name was Alan Arness, and he noticed that this letter was signed James Arness. And so the first thing he did was call Jim up and, you know, you got my name, you know. And it turns out that they were first cousins. Their fathers are brothers.
Oh, yeah.
They had been living in Minnesota, you know, and that's where the other brother was. So anyway, this Alan Arness said to some of the other in his group there, let's go up to Kenai and see what's going on, why they can't get power out here. So they came up here and saw, and he says to Jim when they were talking about it, he says, I think, you know, you would be better off to stay with Homer Electric if you can get in there instead of trying to get your own, because it would be so small in comparison to the size, you know, compared to Homer Electric. Jim says, well, I agree with that, but, you know, I'm afraid we're gonna be left out and never get it, you know. So anyway, that's what happened, and that's how Home Electric came out this way, after they saw that they had to.
Yeah, they buy Raleigh out, it was Frank
Oh,
Raleigh.
they brought Frank Raleigh out, and Jim would have tried to, he would have built, you know, if they had applied and gotten this Cook Inlet one, they would have bought Raleigh out and then had Kenai and out this way.
Oh, yeah.
But, so that's how that got stopped, and then, you know, when after Jim got off the dock and had time to think of other things, and the one thing that was bugging him was that there wasn't any schools and there wasn't any swimming pool out this way at all, and there had to be, you know, as far as he was concerned. So when he got into the borough assembly, he got on as president, and then he started making noises around it, and he says, I'm gonna work on this, you know. And so anyway, they started the service area out here, you know, and that took in a lot of the oil, so we had good money in our service area, and we could handle, so Jim thought the idea of a swimming pool that was for the community, not just a school, you know, would be better. So that's how that got started.
That's a good pool too.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
They're having their 50th anniversary. I think it's this next weekend or sometime pretty soon.
For the pool?
50 years.
Yeah.
God, that really.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, I guess I don't know what I got off. Anyway, Jim just got his feet into everything, and whatever he did, he went full bore.
Yeah. Well, I don't know, we've kind of covered a whole bunch there.
Yeah, we
You
did,
got anything you'd like to add, or?
Well, if you were asking about me, you know, I taught school in Kenai and in Unga before I graduated from college, which I never did. I never got back there because I was too busy getting married.
Yeah.
So, but then after we got back here to the dock, to the homestead after the dock, and Jim was busy with the swimming pool and with his snow machines, and then he got into fishing, you know, and bought fishing boats, and he was just busy doing stuff. So I started down, I thought, well, I gotta think about something, get something, and I ended up working for the city of Kenai. I had an exercise thing, that's how I got started on it. And then somebody in there talked me into being manager of the Kenai Chamber.
Oh, yeah.
And I was there when we moved Moose Meat John's cabin, you know, and stuff. I was there for 15 years, and it was pretty active. I was living out here all the time, but we go in there and, you know, different things that were done. And I was getting kind of bored with it too. It was just, you know, pretty routine. And this guy came from Washington, and at the time, Stevens and Don Young, and Frank Murkowski had gotten in there. So there were the three representatives from Alaska there, and they were all Republicans.
Yeah.
So, and they wanted to have an outlet on the peninsula, and they sent this guy up here, and he comes to my chamber office, and he said, I knew all three of those guys, you know, and had
Sure.
dealings with them and so forth. And they decided that I should be the one that should have that, started a congressional office, one combination office for all three of them. So I said, okay, I'll try it. That sounds like interesting something. So I did. And then after he left, I thought, God, to have three bosses like that, I mean, they're, you know, self-made men all
Yeah.
alone, you know. So I told myself, okay, if I do it, I've got to, in my mind, I've got to tell myself I have three offices, and they're all three different, only they're not. They're all in one. It's just me in one office, but I've got three bosses, you know. It worked out okay, and I did that for another 15 years.
Whoa.
75 years old, and Jim was kind of fading, and he was home more and needed more attention, and so I thought, well, it's time to quit. So I sent letters to all three offices and told them that I wanted to resign by a certain date, and I never heard from anybody. So finally I thought, well, there's only one way to do this, and that's to send them another letter and say, I'm leaving this office on such and such a date, and if you want help finding somebody from here to take over it, I'll do that, but otherwise the door is closed. So, and Ted called me, Ted Stevens, and he said, what are you doing? I said, I have to stay home and take care of my husband. So that's it. So that's when I quit.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that was an exciting time, and I did that for 15 years too, you know.
That would be, yes, all three of those.
Handling those three. They were so different, you know, all politicians, but the three of them were so different, and I had to tell myself, you know, you gotta, they meet with different people, they act different, they want different attention. You know, with Don Young, you never knew what was gonna happen, goodness sakes. God. You know, when the Iliam erupted, I don't remember what year it was, Don was down here, and he had come down the night before it erupted, and I had him scheduled for meetings all down and he was all the way down to Homer, and then I was gonna leave him there. I had a dinner engagement there with him, and then I was gonna drive back here, and I had a friend that was gonna pick him up in the morning and get him on a plane to take him back to Anchorage, you know. I mean, that's what you had to do with him. You had to, you know, practically feed him. You know, they wanted to be seen, and they wanted to talk to everybody, but they didn't want to know anything about how you do it or what
They
happened.
wanted you to arrange everything for them.
Absolutely. So then the next morning when Don had stayed at Louis' restaurant, the hotel there that night, and I got up the next morning and Ileana had erupted and it was, you know, closed in. Oh God. So I went in and got him, and I had him over on sound off from the radio station, and I got a call from the guy in Anchorage, and he says, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm gonna head down the highway to Homer, you know, and then you fly up there." "Well, you can't do that because there's this ashes all over everything," and he says, "I'll make sure that you have a police escort if you're gonna do it, if you're gonna get it." I says, "That's fine." So we started off on our day did the sound off and then went to lunch and whatever it was. And I never saw any, on the road down to Homer, there wasn't another car on the road but us, Dawn and I. And we get down to Homer, and I'm at the dinner, and Dawn is about to speak. And this woman appears out of nowhere, and she has a pie, and she threw it at Dawn in his face.
I remember that incident, yes.
Yeah. And I was sitting there, I stayed for the dinner, and I had my chair, and about 2 seats down from where I was, there was this guy with, he looked like, well, he was just I thought he was just a homesteader or something with whiskers and stuff, you know. And he had gotten up and gone around over like this, and I could see that he was headed for where Dawn was up in the front there. Oh God, what's going to happen here and all? And then that woman shows up, and I thought the two of them were connected. But it turned out that guy had just come from California. And he told me afterwards, he stopped that woman from, you know, when she threw the pie, but then he got her out the door and, you know, got her away. And he said he could tell that was happening, so he had gotten off his chair here and gone around to protect, he was protecting Dawn. That's it. But anyway, so I got up there by Dawn, and Don looked at me and he says, "Get me out of here."
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, where do you want to go?" I had a hotel room for him, you know, and he was supposed to be flying, but there wasn't any planes flying anyway, you know, that ash was still on. So we went back to the hotel, and he got his suitcase and came back. We drove back from Homer, and we did not see a car from Homer to Kenai that night. The ash was so bad that nobody was driving but us.
Yeah.
And he stayed here for about 4 days, and finally I said to Joe, "Can't you drive him to Anchorage?" Joe had an old wreck of a pickup or something, and he took him.
Yeah.
And then another time, Don, I shouldn't be telling these things. He was talking to an organization. This was in Kenai, and I don't remember who it was, but anyway, this fellow came walking up from the audience and got up right by him, and then started unzipping his pants, and it was what do they call it? You know, showing their butt at the you know, whatever they call it at the time. There, you know, you'd read about them every once in a while.
Yeah.
And this guy was doing this, and Don, you know, I mean, somebody got him out of there. You know, a couple of guys got the guy out of there. And I picked up Don and I said, "You stay right here, don't move." And I went over to the newspaper and I said, "Don't you dare put that in the paper that happened. And I don't want that to happen." But that kind of
I was
stuff.
trying to remember what they did call that.
Mooning or?
Mooning, yes, that's what it was,
Yeah,
mooning too.
yeah.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. You know, when I saw the guy do that, I couldn't believe it.
Oh,
But I always tried to, whenever I took these guys, whenever they were speaking, I stayed there, but I tried to, I got a seat back, kind of, you know, where I could see the audience and would watch and be on the alert, because you never knew, and with Dawn especially.
You attracted them.
Oh, jeez. And Ted, everybody loved Ted Stevens, you know. I never had any problem with him. The only thing that I did with Ted Stevens every time he came, you know, his daughter lives over, I forgot the road over here. She's married and she's lived there forever. And every time Ted came down here, he wanted to see her and her family. And so I always made time for him, and I'd take him over there, or they'd meet someplace and just be able to visit a little bit, you know.
Yeah.
But I never had any trouble. And with the women, Nancy Murkowski was well loved, and she liked to go with women's organizations and talk to them. That was good. Ted was, you know, his wife was in a plane crash.
Yeah, I remember that too.
And then when he remarried, that other gal never wanted to come down here at all, so I didn't have to worry about that.
Yeah, Ted was my dad's attorney up until he went politician. When he was an attorney, he was Dad's attorney.
But it was a good time, but 15 years was enough.
Yeah.
Sounds like you did a good job. Tough job, but good job.
Well, it wasn't the case of it was a busy time. I was always busy. Since then, I keep busy, but I don't know what I do anymore.
Well, I hope all that recorded